Number 1. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum. In 1902, a crew of Maltese construction workers cutting cisterns for a new housing development on the island of Malta broke through a limestone ceiling. What they found beneath them was a 3-level subterranean complex carved entirely from living rock. They tried to hide it. For reasons never fully documented, the workers attempted to conceal the discovery and continue building. They failed. The Hypogeum spans over 1,600 square feet. It was carved from Globigerina limestone using obsidian blades and deer antler tools. Construction began around 4000 BCE and continued for centuries. That makes it roughly 6,000 years old. To put that in modern terms, the builders of this underground complex began work 2,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. The first professional excavator was a Jesuit priest named Manuel Maigre. He began cataloging the site but died in Tunisia in 1907. Of archaeological context, gone. But what of archaeological context, gone? But what survived was the architecture, and the architecture does something that no one expected. On the second level, there is a small carved chamber called the oracle room. When a male voice is tuned to roughly 70 hertz or 114 hertz, the entire underground complex vibrates. Sound echoes for up to 13 seconds. Archaeologist Fernando Coimbra, during testing, described feeling sound pass through his body at high speed, followed by a deep involuntary relaxation. That alone would be remarkable. But neuroscientist Ian Cook at UCLA took it further. In a 2008 study, Cook found that at exactly 110 Hz, brain activity shifts dramatically, enters what neurologists call a hypnagogic state. The brain is in a state of deep relaxation. The left hemisphere, the region responsible for language and analytical processing, goes quiet. The right hemisphere lights up. The brain enters what neurologists call a hypnagogic state, the threshold between waking and sleep. Subjects experience vivid imagery, auditory hallucinations, and a measurable shutdown of the prefrontal cortex. This effect did not replicate at neighboring frequencies. It was specific to 110 Hz. A 2020 study added another layer. Researchers discovered that the chamber's peak resonant frequencies are evenly spaced and correspond to a whole-tone musical scale. Achieving that requires fine-tuning multiple non-contiguous cave walls across independent chambers. Radio frequency engineer Glenn Kreisberg examined the oracle chamber ceiling and identified it as carved into the geometry of a waveguide, a structure used in modern RF engineering to direct electromagnetic signals. Linda Enix, founder of the Old Temple Study Foundation, noted that the carved niches, curved walls, shallow shelves, corbelled ceilings, and concave surfaces are direct architectural precursors to modern acoustically engineered performance halls. The 110 Hz resonance is not unique to Malta. Identical frequencies have been measured at Newgrange in Ireland and other Neolithic chambers worldwide. Paulo de Bertolis conducted EEG testing on volunteers inside the Hypogeum and found that each person had a personal frequency between 90 and 120 Hz, at which they entered altered states of consciousness. Some reported meditative insights, others experienced vivid visualizations. The complex's deepest chamber, called the Holy of Holies, was aligned so that winter solstice sunrise would shine through the original surface entrance directly onto the innermost walls. So what was this place? The mainstream interpretation treats it as a ritual funerary space. Acoustics in this view developed incidentally from the natural properties of the chamber geometry and limestone composition. The archaeological counter-argument is more deliberate. The acoustic precision across non-contiguous chambers, the whole tone frequency spacing, and the waveguide ceiling geometry all point to intentional engineering by builders who understood resonance through direct experimentation, even without formal acoustic theory. They could not write a physics equation, but they could carve a cave wall, test the sound, and carve again until it rang at the right pitch. The fringe theory goes further, proposing a now-lost global network of acoustic ritual sites all operating near 110 Hz, designed to induce group trance states for spiritual or ceremonial practice. There is one more detail. Among the excavated remains were elongated skulls. Forensic examination confirmed the elongation was natural, not the result of artificial cranial binding. One skull lacked a feature called the fossa mediana, a structure considered anatomically necessary in modern humans. These skulls were displayed at Malta's National Museum of Archaeology until 1985, then quietly removed by Heritage Malta. They are now accessible only by special researcher permission, and no public explanation for their removal has been given. Near the so-called snake pit, adjacent to a shaft leading down to a forbidden and unstudied third level, excavators found a 12-centimeter clay figurine of a reclining woman in a pleated skirt. She is known as the Sleeping Lady. Today, only 80 visitors per day are permitted inside. The microclimate is strictly regulated, photography is completely banned, and below the second level, the third level remains unexcavated and officially off limits. So what happens when a mystery isn't underground but out in the open, spread across an entire desert, and completely invisible unless you happen to be flying overhead? Number 2. The Giant Stone. Circles of Jordan. In 1920, British pilot Lionel Rees flew across the Jordanian desert on a routine flight and photographed something from the air that nobody on the ground had ever noticed. Enormous stone circles, some stretching hundreds of meters across, sat in the open landscape. They were invisible at ground level. They looked like unremarkable piles of basalt rubble unless you were above them. RAF Flight Lieutenant Percy Maitland published a 1927 account in which he noted that local Bedouin called these formations the works of old men. After Rees's photographs, 60 years passed before anyone seriously examined them. Systematic aerial survey only began around 2004. High-resolution imaging has now documented 11 big circles in Jordan, plus 1 in Syria and 2 in Turkey. Diameters range from 220 to 445 meters. The largest is nearly 3 times the size of an Olympic running track. The circles were built from low stone walls only a few feet high. Originally, they contained no openings. Anyone entering would have had to hop over the wall. Archaeologist David Kennedy of the University of Western Australia led the most sustained research program on these structures. He stated the design consistency across sites is too close to be a coincidence. An ancient Roman road cuts directly across one circle, establishing that they predate the Roman Empire. Materials found at the sites date from the Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age, roughly 2000 to 4500 BCE. Kennedy estimated that a dozen people working hard could complete a big circle in about a week. But the geometric precision required at least one person functioning as an architect, tying a long rope to a central post and walking the circumference. The walls are too low to pen animals. The shape is wrong for livestock enclosures. There are no openings. Every practical pastoral function has been eliminated by the design itself. In 1995, President Bill Clinton ordered the declassification of old CIA satellite images. This decision, made for entirely unrelated geopolitical reasons, gave archaeologists sudden access to high-resolution overhead photography of the Middle East. Kennedy published his findings in the journal Zeitschrift for Orient Archaeology, noting these circles had received very little archaeological attention and were relatively unknown even to regional experts. 8 circles cluster in west-central Jordan between Wadi el-Hassa and the Shera Escarpment. A second group of 4 lies north of the Azraq Oasis. The broader landscape contains thousands of other stone structures. Wheels with radiating spokes, kites built as funnel structures for driving animal kills, pendants associated with burials, and mysterious walls meandering thousands of meters with no apparent function. The mainstream theory, advanced by Kennedy himself, treats the circles as a manifestation of some unexplained cultural practice. He explicitly rejects the lost civilization idea, suggesting communal ritual or territorial marking instead. The archaeological theory proposes ceremonial gathering sites or astronomical markers. The big circle near Homs, Syria, was positioned to give a panoramic view of a crop-bearing basin. That circle has since been virtually destroyed. The fringe theory notes the obvious. These structures are designed to be seen from above. Some interpret this as a connection to cosmological beliefs about sky-dwelling beings or celestial observation. No inscriptions, no artifacts, no bones, and no burials have ever been directly associated with any circle. Kennedy has stated the critical next step is on-the-ground excavation. Aerial imagery alone cannot replace digging. But accessing these remote desert sites remains extremely difficult. The Jordan circles are invisible from the ground and unexplained from the sky. But what about a mystery, where the object itself has been sitting in a university collection for decades, and nobody can figure out what it even is? Number 3, the Wisconsin Mystery Circles. In 1986, scientists at the University of California, Riverside examined a rock from Wisconsin bearing perfectly circular raised formations on its surface. The rock dated to the Ordovician period, that is approximately 450 million years ago. Wisconsin at that time was not a landlocked Midwestern state. It was a shallow tropical sea. The most complex animals alive were early fish and cephalopods. Nothing walked on land. The circles were raised above the rock surface and perfectly round. They did not match anything in the known fossil record for that geological era. Scientists studied the rock for years. They compared it against catalog trace fossils known as ichnofossils. Nothing matched. The specimen was eventually filed away as an unsolved mystery in the university's collections. Then, in 2015, still completely stumped after nearly 3 decades, the UC Riverside team did something scientists rarely do. They opened the problem to the internet. They posted the specimen on Reddit and asked the public for theories. The responses range from sarcastic to surprisingly technical. Prehistoric snails, jellyfish, sea sponges, bacterial colonies. None of the suggestions matched. No known natural geological process readily explains perfectly circular raised formations on an Ordovician sea floor. The circles do not correspond to any organism in the typical Ordovician fossil assemblage: brachiopods, trilobites, crinoids. No comparable specimens from similar deposits have been found anywhere else in the world. It is a complete isolate. The mainstream theory suggests an unknown biological origin, possibly a soft-bodied organism that left no other trace in the fossil record. Countless Paleozoic creatures had no hard parts and simply vanished. The scientific alternative proposes microbial colonies resembling stromatolite-like formations, though the geometry does not match any known microbialites. The fringe theory suggests evidence of an unknown organized biological process, or even a geological mechanism with no modern analog. No peer-reviewed paper has ever provided a definitive identification. The specimen remains in UC Riverside's collections, formally unclassified. As of the latest available reports, no further analysis or resolution has been announced. But if a 450 million year old mystery with one specimen seems hard to solve, consider this. What happens when you have thousands of specimens and still cannot figure out what the creature was? Number 4. The Tully Monster. In 1955, an amateur fossil collector named Francis Tully was picking through the coal spoil heaps near Chicago in an area known as the Maison Creek fossil beds. He found something he had never seen before. He brought it to the Field Museum of Natural History. The curator, Eugene Richardson, examined it and admitted the museum could not even decide which phylum it belonged to. He called the situation serious and embarrassing. The creature, officially named Tullimonstrum gregarium, lived roughly 310 million years ago in shallow tropical waters. It had a cigar-shaped body, about 15 centimeters long, a triangular tail fin, 2 long stalked eyes, and a proboscis tipped with a toothed mouth-like appendage. Over the decades, it has been compared to nemertenes, polychaetes, gastropods, conodonts, and the Cambrian stem arthropod Opabinia. None of these comparisons held up. In 1989, Illinois designated it the official state fossil. It remains the only state fossil that scientists cannot classify to a phylum. The evolutionary steps leading to the Tully monster are completely unknown. It appeared in the Maison Creek beds and nowhere else on Earth. The Maison Creek Lagerstätte is one of the few locations where ironstone concretions formed rapidly enough to preserve soft-bodied imprints before decay. Without this geological accident, the Tully monster would be entirely unknown to science. In 2016, Victoria McCoy and her team analyzed over 1,200 specimens and reported evidence for a notochord, cartilaginous arcuelia, gill pouches, and keratinous teeth. They placed it on the stem lineage to lampreys, a vertebrate. In 2017, Lawrence Salan and colleagues rejected this. The supposed notochord extends in front of the eyes, which occurs in no known vertebrate. The gill pouches lacked the complex skeletal architecture seen in lampreys. Then in 2023, a University of Tokyo team led by Tomoyuki Mikami used three-dimensional laser scanning and micro-CT imaging on more than 150 specimens. They found head segmentation extending from the body, a trait found in no known vertebrate lineage. McCamey stated definitively that the vertebrate hypothesis was untenable. McCoy acknowledged the findings, but pointed out that the large, complex eyes remain very difficult to explain as an invertebrate. The species name gregarium means common. Thousands of specimens exist. The irony is hard to miss. There is a footnote worth mentioning. A Field Museum staff member named Patterson once sent letters from Kenya under various aliases, fabricating a Tully Monster discovery in Africa. The prank escalated to the point where the museum began planning an expedition. Patterson eventually revealed the hoax in a Christmas letter. The mainstream theory holds the creature was a stem lamprey or non-vertebrate chordate. The counter theory, supported by the 2023 evidence, classifies it as a radically modified protostome, related to insects, worms, or snails. The fringe possibility is that it represents a completely extinct body plan with no living descendants whatsoever, a lost branch of animal life that shares no lineage with anything alive today. As McCamey noted, there were many interesting animals that were never preserved as fossils. Maison Creek gives us evidence obtainable nowhere else on Earth. It also reminds us that the natural world may contain categories we have not yet imagined. Now, if a fossil with thousands of specimens can defy classification, consider what happens when you find a single carved figurine 320 feet underground, in a geological layer 2 million years old. Number 5. The Nampa Figurine. In 1889, workers boring a well in Nampa, Idaho, pulled a small figurine from 320 feet below the surface. It came up through a sand pump. The surrounding sediment layers dated to approximately 2 million years ago at the Pleo-Pleistocene boundary. The figurine is roughly 1.5 inches long. It is made of stone and clay. It clearly depicts a human form. Head, torso, and limbs are all identifiable. It bears ornate, hand-carved designs. Paleontologists believe only Homo sapiens possess the fine motor skills and cognitive ability for this type of detailed workmanship. Homo sapiens appeared roughly 300,000 years ago. No known hominid species was present in North America 2 million years ago under any mainstream archaeological timeline. The figurine was examined by Professor Albert A. Wright of Oberlin College, geologist G.F. Wright, and Smithsonian personnel. All found no evidence of fraud. Clay composition analysis showed the material was distinct from local surface clays. It matched the deep subsurface stratigraphy at that depth. The find was documented in the Proceedings of the Boston Society of Natural History in 1889 and referenced in the 12th annual report of the Smithsonian Institution. The mainstream theory is contamination. The figurine, in this view, fell into the borehole from a shallower layer during drilling. Sand pump extraction methods can theoretically introduce material from upper strata. The archaeological counter-argument points to the clay composition analysis. If the figurine came from near the surface, its material should match surface clays. It does not. It matches the deep strata. The fringe interpretation classifies it as an out-of-place artifact or OOP art, evidence of a lost pre-human civilization or a radically different timeline of human development. No comparable finds have been made in any similar geological context anywhere in North America. It is a completely isolated anomaly. Mainstream archaeology generally does not discuss it, treating it as either a contamination event or an unresolvable oddity. The figurine is believed to be at the Idaho State Historical Museum. No modern re-examination using thermoluminescence, accelerator mass spectrometry, radiocarbon, or any current dating technology has ever been conducted on it. The case highlights a recurring pattern. When a single anomalous find contradicts established chronology with no supporting evidence nearby, it tends to be shelved rather than investigated further. The Nampa figurine is one carved object from one site. But what happens when you find over 200 nearly identical objects scattered across an entire continent, spanning 30,000 years? Number 6. The Venus Figurines. More than 200 figurines have been found across Europe and into Siberia. Most date from the Gravettian period, roughly 26,000 to 21,000 years ago. The oldest, the Venus of Hohlefels, dates to at least 40,000 years ago. It is small enough to fit in a closed fist and was found in a cave in southwestern Germany. The figurines range from 6 to 16 centimeters. They are carved from mammoth ivory, horn, stone, or rarely clay. Some were threaded and worn as amulets. Nearly all display the same body template, widest at the abdomen, exaggerated reproductive organs, small featureless heads, and absent or tapered hands and feet. The Venus of Willendorf, found in Austria and roughly 30,000 years old, is the most famous. It stands 11.1 centimeters tall, carved from oolitic limestone not native to its find site, and was tinted with red ochre. The sheer consistency of the design across time and space is the central puzzle. 30,000 years, thousands of miles, cultures with no known contact. And yet the same exaggerated female form appears again and again. No male equivalents with comparable exaggeration or geographic spread have ever been found. Catherine McCoy and Leroy McDermott proposed the figurines were self-portraits by pregnant women looking down at their own bodies. This would explain the exaggerated breasts, the absent feet, and the lack of facial features. UC anthropologist Michael Bisson challenged this, noting that water pools and puddles could have served as mirrors, undermining the downward gaze argument. The mainstream theory, advanced in a 2020 study by Richard Johnson's team at the University of Colorado, took a different approach. They measured waist-to-hip and waist-to-shoulder ratios across all published figurines and found that those closest to advancing glacial fronts were the most obese. The correlation was direct, figurine proportions tracked with proximity to ice sheets. Johnson's team hypothesized the figurines represented an idealized body type for survival. Larger, fattier bodies could better withstand freezing conditions and carry pregnancies to term. When glaciers retreated and climate warmed, figurine proportions decreased. In modern medical terms, this maps onto a phenomenon called developmental origins of health and disease, where maternal nutrition during pregnancy programs offspring metabolism for the expected environment. The archaeological theory, advanced by Helen Benigni and others, argues the consistency suggests an archetype of a female supreme creator, a religious impulse repeated across cultures. Soffer, Ottavasio, and Hyland published a 2000 study revealing that many figurines wear garments, including basket hats, netted snoods, string skirts, and belts. These details, visible only under magnification, suggest sophisticated textile techniques, basket weaving, netting, and string production. Far more advanced material culture than typically attributed to Upper Paleolithic peoples. The fringe interpretation, drawing on Johnson's data, reframes the figurines as medical records rather than art, documents encoding survival information passed across generations. Many figurines show heavy wear, indicating they were heirlooms passed from mother to daughter. Some displayed deliberate breakage patterns, suggesting ritual destruction was part of their function. The term Venus Figurines is itself controversial. It references the Greek goddess. Though these objects predate her mythology by tens of thousands of years, the fundamental question remains open. The Venus figurines are small, portable. The Venus figurines are small, portable, and personal. The next mystery is the opposite. Thousands of stone megaliths, some weighing 14 tons, scattered across a plateau that is also one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Number 7. The Plain of Jars. More than 2,100 stone jars are scattered across the Shinkwang Plateau in Laos. They range from 3 to 9 feet tall. The heaviest weighs up to 14 tons. Most are carved from sandstone. Some are granite or limestone. Over 90 sites have been identified containing between 1 and 400 jars each. New research dates their construction to between 1240 and 660 BCE. Only one jar out of all 2,100 bears any decoration. A bas-relief of a human figure with raised arms and bent knees, referred to as the Frogman, at Site 1. Parallels have been drawn to rock paintings at Huashan in Guangxi, China, dating from 500 BCE to 200 CE. French archaeologist Madeleine Colony conducted the first systematic study in the 1930s. She found black organic soil inside the jars, colored glass beads, burnt teeth, and bone fragments. Around the jars she found human bones, pottery, iron, and bronze objects. She also excavated a cave at Site 1 with man-made holes she interpreted as chimney vents, concluding it had been a crematorium. A 2016 Laos Australian excavation at Site 1 found remains of at least 18 individuals. Over 60% were infants and children. Nearly half died at the fetal stage or in early infancy. Extrapolation from those findings suggests the area could contain remains of more than 8,000 individuals. Here's the temporal paradox. Radiocarbon dating indicates activity spanning from 8200 BCE to 1214 CE, but the human burials cluster between the 9th and 13th centuries CE. That is a gap of up to 2,000 years from the jar's estimated construction date. The jars appear to have been repurposed over millennia, originally built for one function and later adopted for burial by descendant or entirely unrelated populations. The mainstream theory treats them as crematorium vessels linked to ancient Laotian and Cambodian traditions in which bodies of elite members were placed in large urns to aid the soul's journey through the afterlife. The archaeological theory proposes they were initially used for brewing celebratory rice wine or whiskey, then repurposed for burials by later populations. The jar's open, unlined, unsealed design with lip rims suggesting perishable lids supports this idea. The fringe theory draws on local legend, which attributes the jars to a race of giants whose king, Kun Chung, had them built to brew rice wine, celebrating a military victory. Researchers found carved stone discs with geometrical images, concentric circles, human figures, and animals, all discovered with their decorated sides placed face down. Multiple indicators point to a complex society with distinct social classes, based on size variation among jars and associated artifacts. Between 1964 and 1969, the Plain of Jars was heavily bombed by the United States Air Force during the secret war in Laos. Approximately one-third of the cluster bombs dropped did not explode. Unexploded ordnance now contaminates more than 35% of the province's land area. Less than 10% of jar sites have been cleared of American explosives. This makes it one of the most dangerous archaeological sites in the world. UNESCO named 11 jar site clusters a World Heritage Site in 2019. Isotope analysis is currently underway to determine the diet and geographic origins of interred individuals. The culture that created the jars left no written records, no identified settlements, and no identifiable living descendants. They are essentially anonymous to history. What happens when the data does exist, when multiple dating methods converge on a clear answer, but the answer is so disruptive that the scientific community refuses to accept it? Number 8. The Hueyatlaco Site. Hueyatlaco is an archaeological site in the Valsequito Basin near Puebla, Mexico, about 75 miles southeast of Mexico City. In 1962, archaeologist Cynthia Irwin Williams led the first excavation, describing it as a kill site where animals were hunted and butchered. The animal fossils recovered included bison, camel, direwolf, mammoth, saber-toothed cat, mastodon, and glyptodon. The tools found at the site range from primitive implements to sophisticated bifacially worked knives, scrapers, and double-edged blades made from non-local materials. The variety suggested multiple groups had used the site over a long period. This was a significant find. But the dating results would turn it into something far more controversial. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains at roughly 35,000 years old. Then uranium series dating returned approximately 260,000 years. At that time, the accepted date for human arrival in the Americas was 16,000 years, not 260,000. In 1973, Virginia Steen McIntyre, Harold Malday, and Roald Fryxell returned to the site and applied zircon fission track dating. It yielded 370,000 years before present, with an uncertainty range of plus or minus 240,000 years. Tephrohydration analysis independently indicated approximately 260,000 years. 3 independent dating methods. 3 results converging on extreme antiquity. Irwin Williams called the extreme dates irresponsible. She argued for a more conservative date of roughly 20,000 years before present. That figure was itself controversial at the time. In 1981, the journal Quaternary Research published the paper defending the 250,000-year date. Irwin Williams objected. Malday and Steen McIntyre responded with a point-by-point rebuttal. The professional consequences were severe. Steen McIntyre later stated she did not realize publishing the results would ruin her whole career. Team members were reportedly harassed, viewed as incompetent, or saw their academic careers hampered. Steen McIntyre was forced to abandon her planned dissertation on Hueyatlaco and instead wrote on volcanic ash dating methodology. Irwin Williams never published a final report on the site despite leading the original excavations. Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History eventually closed the site and denied further excavation permits. The mainstream critique holds that the tools are entirely too modern. Bifacial knives and projectile points align with tools from the last glacial maximum, roughly 18,000 to 20,000 years before present, not 250,000 years ago. Uranium series dating on bone can be unreliable due to uranium leaching. The geological theory counters that the U.S. Geological Survey was directly involved using standard geochemical methods. In 2008, Joseph Liddicoate's paleomagnetic research dated the volcanic ash to after the Brunus-Matuyama reversal, approximately 780,000 years ago, providing independent corroboration. The fringe theory sees deliberate suppression to protect the Clovis first paradigm. Steen McIntyre wrote that their work was rejected by most archaeologists because it contradicted that theory, period. Since then, the White Sands footprints in New Mexico, dated to approximately 22,000 years before present, have pushed back accepted human arrival in the Americas. This makes even Irwin Williams's conservative 20,000-year date look prescient. Today, Hueyatlaco exists in a state of academic purgatory. Frequently footnoted in fringe archaeology texts, rarely cited in mainstream literature, and largely absent from anthropology curricula. The fundamental tension remains unresolved. 3 independent dating methods converge on extreme antiquity. The tool typology says far more recent manufacture. Nobody has reconciled the contradiction. When data is controversial, it can be buried in academic silence. But sometimes evidence is literally buried on purpose twice. Number 9. The Cochno Stone. The Cochno Stone is a massive slab of rock measuring 43 by 26 feet, located in Faifley on the outskirts of Clydebank, West Dunbartonshire, Scotland. Its surface is covered in swirling cup and ring marks. It was first fully recorded in 1887 by Reverend James Harvey. It is one of the largest single panels of cup and ring rock art in Europe. Cup and ring marks are a form of prehistoric art found at Neolithic and Bronze Age sites worldwide. They consist of circular hollows carved into rock, often surrounded by concentric rings, dating to approximately 5,000 years ago. There are no known evolutionary precursors to the design. The marks appear in the archaeological record already fully formed. Similar marks have been found across the United Kingdom, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Scandinavia, Brazil, India, and Australia. They span every inhabited continent. No written record or oral tradition from any culture definitively explains what they mean. In 1965, the stone was deliberately reburied under several feet of topsoil to protect it from escalating vandalism and graffiti. It sat in a housing estate in suburban Glasgow. In 2015 and 2016, University of Glasgow archaeologist Kenny Brophy led a project to re-excavate it using modern photogrammetry, three-dimensional scanning, and laser imaging. The re-excavation revealed the stone was more extensively carved than previously documented, with marks that had never been recorded. After the study, the stone was buried again. Brophy's team concluded the risk of damage outweighed the benefits of leaving it exposed. A full three-dimensional digital model now exists, allowing researchers worldwide to study every mark without physical access. The mainstream theory interprets the marks as territorial markers, maps of water sources, or purely decorative art with local significance. The archaeological theory proposes astronomical calendars. Researchers in the 1930s believed the inscriptions were linked to phenomena like eclipses. The density and arrangement may encode observations of celestial cycles. Brophy disputes the astronomical theory but acknowledges the markings remain deeply enigmatic. The fringe theory connects them to entoptic patterns, forms produced by the human visual cortex under trance conditions. If true, the marks would document phosphines seen during shamanic practice, images hardwired into human neurology rather than transmitted through culture. The stone's sheer size makes it one of the most ambitious pieces of prehistoric rock art ever created. No tools used to carve it have been found at the site. The density of marks is unusual. Most cup and ring sites have far fewer carvings spread across larger areas. The central question, why do the same abstract symbols appear across continents separated by oceans created by cultures with no known contact? Independent invention, shared ancestry, or something about the structure of human cognition itself? The Cochno Stone was buried to save it from suburban vandals. The next site was nearly destroyed by luxury condo developers. Number 10. the Miami Circle. In 1998, developers digging foundations for a new condominium complex at the mouth of the Miami River discovered a circle of 24 large holes filled with heavy limestone tablets cut directly into the bedrock. The circle measures approximately 38 feet in diameter. It is carved into Miami Oolitic limestone bedrock at 401 Brickell Point, now one of the most expensive real estate districts in America. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts and charcoal placed the site at approximately 1,800 to 2,000 years old, roughly 100 BCE to 100 CE. The 24 rectangular basins held limestone boulders and artifacts, including stone tools, shark teeth, and marine shells. Archaeologists attribute the circle to the Tequesta, a tribe described by 16th century Spanish explorers as bloodthirsty, hostile, and nomadic. The Tequesta lived in small roving bands across the Everglades. A permanent stone monument carved into bedrock is deeply paradoxical for their known way of life. They had no other permanent structures. They did not practice agriculture. Yet someone among them organized the labor to carve 24 precise basins into solid limestone. Some basins align with celestial events. The east-west axis roughly corresponds to equinox sunrise and sunset. An eye-shaped basin on the eastern edge may have targeted a specific star or constellation. The site also contained a complete sea turtle carapace and a shark skeleton, both interpreted as ritual offerings. A carved basalt axe head, made from stone not found anywhere in Florida, established long-distance trade networks reaching far beyond the Everglades. Developer Michael Baladowski originally planned to remove and relocate the circle. The idea outraged archaeologists and the Miccosukee tribe. The state of Florida purchased the land for $26.7 million to preserve the site in place. It was declared a National Historic Landmark in 2002. The mainstream theory treats the circle as foundation post holes for a large Tequesta structure, possibly a council house or temple with a wooden superstructure that has since rotted away. The archaeological theory proposes a ceremonial astronomical observatory with the 24 basins potentially corresponding to a calendrical system. The fringe theory suggests the work of a more sophisticated Tequesta civilization than currently recognized, or an earlier unknown culture predating the Tequesta entirely. The Tequesta survived until the early 18th century. When Spain ceded Florida to Britain in 1763, the remaining approximately 200 individuals were likely evacuated to Cuba. No comparable Tequesta stone structures have ever been found anywhere else in Florida or the American Southeast. Additional excavations in 2004 and 2005 uncovered secondary features and a possible second arc, suggesting the circle was even more complex than originally thought. The site is now an archaeological preserve at Brickell Point Park, accessible via a viewing platform. The Miami Circle remains the only known cut-in-bedrock prehistoric structure in the eastern United States. A total one-off, with no parallel anywhere in the region. 10 sites, 6 continents, 450 million years of history. The connective thread is not aliens. It is not lost super civilizations. It is the gap between what was built and what we think the builders could have known. The Hypogeum's acoustic engineering matches modern performance hall design. Jordan's circles require geometric precision achievable with a rope, but purposeless by any known metric. Venus figurines maintain consistent proportions across 30,000 years without known contact. Cup and ring marks appear on every inhabited continent with no shared written tradition. The Tequesta carved into bedrock despite being nomadic. The Plain of Jars culture left 2,100 megaliths and 0 written records. 3 sites were actively suppressed or hidden. The Hypogeum skulls were removed from display. Hueyatlaco was closed by government order. The Cochno Stone was buried twice. Professional consequences followed the data at Hueyatlaco. Professional silence surrounds the Nampa Figurine. Both represent institutional responses to anomaly. Modern technology is only now being applied to most of these sites. 3-dimensional scanning, micro-CT imaging, EEG monitoring, photogrammetry, satellite imagery, isotope analysis. The University of Tokyo's 2023 study used imaging technology that did not exist when the Tully Monster debate began in the 1950s. Brophy's Cochno Stone project created a permanent digital model accessible to researchers worldwide. De Bertolus measured individual brain responses to specific frequencies inside a 6,000-year-old chamber. Johnson's team ran the first statistical correlation between figurine proportions and glacial proximity across every published Venus figurine. The Tully Monster has generated at least 6 major peer-reviewed studies with contradictory conclusions since 2016. More data has not produced more clarity. The Wisconsin mystery circles have a sample size of 1. The Nampa Figurine sits in a museum with no modern re-examination. The Mazon Creek preservation conditions that saved the Tully Monster are geologically rare, meaning countless other impossible organisms existed and left no trace at all. The pattern is consistent. Anomalies do not get resolved. They get shelved, buried, defunded, or forgotten until accident or technology intervenes. The common denominator is not mystery for its own sake. It is incomplete investigation due to funding, politics, access, or institutional resistance. The bottleneck at almost every site is not technology. It is funding, access, and institutional willingness to revisit controversial or neglected findings. The Nampa figurine remains the most glaring omission. Sitting in a museum, never re-examined with thermoluminescence, accelerator mass spectrometry, radiocarbon, or any modern analytical method. Consider the behavior behind the objects. The Hypogeum builders spent centuries fine-tuning cave walls to produce a whole-tone musical scale. That investment of labor only makes sense if sound itself was the purpose. 30,000 years of Venus figurines across cultures with no known contact suggest something deeper than fashion or religion, possibly a biological or neurological impulse expressed in material form. Jordan's circles serve no practical function, too low for walls, no openings for entry, no artifacts inside, yet someone organized a dozen people for a week of precision construction. The Plain of Jars culture moved 14-ton megaliths across a plateau, left 2,100 of them, and vanished without a single written word. Cup and ring marks appear on every inhabited continent. If they are entoptic patterns from the visual cortex, they may document not culture but neurology. The consistency of these building impulses across time, geography, and culture suggests they may reflect something fundamental about human cognition rather than specific traditions. Every site represents an enormous investment of labor relative to apparent practical return. The return was something we cannot easily measure: social cohesion, spiritual experience, identity. The Hypogeum's 110 hertz effect works on modern brains exactly as it presumably worked on Neolithic brains. Human neurology has not changed, even if culture has. Building beyond practical need appears to be as ancient as building itself, predating agriculture, writing, and permanent settlement. These builders did not need modern theory to exploit resonance, geometry, or celestial mechanics. Empirical observation and iterative refinement over generations can produce the same results. They could not describe a standing wave mathematically, but they could carve a wall, sing into the chamber, listen, and carve again. They could not calculate orbital mechanics, but they could watch the same sunrise point for 50 years and mark where it fell. These 10 sites span 450 million years of Earth's history and at least 40,000 years of human activity. Not one requires an extraordinary explanation, but everyone requires more investigation than it has received. The acoustic precision of the Hypogeum exploits the same physics that governs modern concert halls. The geometric regularity of Jordan's circles uses the same mathematics that underlies satellite surveying. The celestial alignments of the Miami Circle reference the same astronomical constants measured by modern observatories. What connects these sites is not mystery. It is the application of fundamental, unchanging natural laws by people we consistently underestimate: resonance, geometry, material science, astronomy. None of these require writing, formal education, or institutional knowledge to discover through direct observation. The greatest barrier to understanding these sites is not missing evidence. It is the assumption that people who lacked our technology must have lacked our intelligence. Every generation that studies these sites with better tools finds more complexity, not less. The Tully Monster's classification has gotten harder, not easier, with more data. The Wisconsin circles remain unexplained not because the answer is exotic, but because the question is genuinely new. Hueyatlaco's dates have not been disproven. They have been avoided. The Cochno Stone was buried to protect it, not because we understood it. The cultures that built these sites had one advantage modern researchers often lack. They had time, generations of uninterrupted observation and refinement. Innovation does not begin with theory. it begins with sustained attention to how the world actually behaves. These mysteries are not evidence of lost super civilizations. They are evidence of ordinary human intelligence applied with extraordinary patience. The fundamental laws of nature, wave propagation, gravitational geometry, orbital mechanics, material resonance were as available 40,000 years ago as they are today. The only variable is whether anyone was paying attention. Someone was.